All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to unpack something that's, well, it's pretty dense, but absolutely fascinating. It's a treatise that lays out a blueprint for a whole new financial architecture, specifically designed for what it calls the post-2026 era. We're talking about a world where law, computer code, and physical assets all merge into one. So yeah, let's get into it. So right off the bat, this image just nails the core idea. Over on the left, you've got the old world. You know, the one that runs on what it calls institutional assumption. Basically, trusting people, trusting banks, trusting a handshake. And man, is it slow. We're talking weeks, even months for things to settle. But on the right, that's the new world. It's all about cryptographic proof. Here, trust isn't in a person, it's in the math, it's in the code. And the speed? We're talking block time, like 12-second finality. This is the huge shift we're going to be exploring. Okay, so here's how we're going to break all this down. First up, we've got to learn the language, right? This new financial grammar. Then we'll pop the hood and look at the engine, what they call the rules, rails, and rock. From there, we'll get into the mindset shift, how you go from just being a collector to an active capitalist. After that, we'll check out the Sovereign's playbook for some pretty wild strategies. And we'll wrap it all up with the big why, the physical reason this whole thing supposedly needs to exist. First things first, we really have to get a handle on the new language of the system. The whole idea is to move away from sorting out problems in a courtroom after they happen, which the source calls human time, to a system where the rules are enforced automatically in what it calls block time. And the key term here, the foundation for everything, is syntactical trust. This is where it gets really mind-bending. It's a system that doesn't just write down a promise on paper, it treats that promise as a line of code that can be executed. Just think about that for a second. Your contract isn't a document, it's a command in a program. And that means enforcement isn't a reaction to something going wrong, it's built in from the start to prevent things from ever going wrong. And honestly, this is the perfect analogy. On the left is the system we have now, the courtroom model. If a deal goes south, you sue, you wait, you spend a ton of money, and maybe, just maybe, you get a result years later. But on the right, you've got the vending machine model. It's simple. You can't argue with a vending machine. You put in the right money, you press the button, and the command executes. If you don't, nothing happens. The failure is just part of the code. And that leads to the most important takeaway. In a system built on syntactical trust, a deal that falls through isn't a breach of contract that you have to go fight about. Nope. It's just a syntax error. The transaction literally can't happen, and it just reverts. Think about it. A world without counterparty risk, because a transaction that could fail, is impossible to even start. That's the game changer here. Okay, so we've got the basic language down. Now, let's take a look at the actual machinery this thing runs on. The source calls it the tripartite sovereign architecture, and as the name suggests, it's built on 3 core pillars. So the argument goes like this. A system that's purely digital is always at risk of just becoming a fantasy, numbers on a screen with no connection to the real world. For true sovereignty, the source claims, you need all 3 of these things working in concert: the legal framework, the digital pipes, and a real physical anchor. Let's quickly break those down. First, you've got the rules. This is a system called AFINET, and its job is to take things like legal judgments, things that are usually just static paper, and turn them into active, tradable digital assets. Next, you need the rails, a secure network called CCG, which is how you actually move that value around. And last, but definitely not least, you have the rock, actual physical precious metals that anchor this whole digital world to something real you can touch. And this is the moment where the physical world literally connects to the digital one. According to the document, a very specific type of official, a civil law notary, plays a crucial role. They don't just stamp a document, they verify the actual human intent behind it. And then they create 3 unbreakable links on the blockchain. One for the document, one for their official seal, and one for the sworn statement. This process is designed to guarantee that the digital token is a perfect tamper-proof representation of a real-world agreement. All right, now let's get into our third section, because having these tools is one thing, but using them requires a totally different mindset. This part is all about changing the way you think about assets like gold and silver. It's about taking them from a passive pile of metal in a safe to a dynamic, active financial tool. This picture says it all, really. On the left is the traditional passive collector. They've got some bars, some coins sitting in a vault. Their wealth is trapped, and it's measured in dollars that go up and down. But on the right, you see the active capitalist. They're using what the source calls spendable metal instruments. Think of them almost like banknotes, but instead of paper, they contain a tiny, precise, verifiable amount of gold or silver. Their wealth is measured in physical weight, and it's kinetic. It's ready to move. So let's look at the practical differences here. A traditional gold coin is hard to divide up, right? You can't shave off a corner to buy a cup of coffee. To use it, you have to sell the whole thing, which usually triggers a taxable event. These spendable instruments, on the other hand, are designed to be highly divisible. They can function like currency, and, as we're about to see, they're structured in a way that aims to sidestep that taxable sale event. So, you've got the tools, you've got the mindset. What can you actually do? This is where we get into the really advanced stuff, the playbook. And it describes two incredibly powerful strategies it calls financial teleportation and mathematical accumulation. Let's walk through financial teleportation. The easiest way to think about it is spending the value of your gold without ever actually selling the gold itself. Step 1. Your physical metal gets verified and tokenized on that notary chain we talked about. Step 2. A smart contract, which is just a self-executing agreement, instantly gives you a line of credit and links it to a payment card. Step 3. When you swipe that card, the system borrows regular currency to pay the merchant, and that loan is immediately secured by your tokenized metal. And this diagram shows you the result of that whole process. You've spent money, you've used the purchasing power of your gold or silver, but you never actually sold the underlying asset. You still own the physical metal. In essence, you've made your asset liquid without, according to this model, triggering a capital gains tax. Now, the second big strategy is what's called the ratio play. And the goal here is really different. You're not trying to make more dollars, you're trying to accumulate more physical weight of metal. The idea is simple. You use the historic ratio between the price of gold and silver. You trade gold for silver when the ratio is high, meaning silver is cheap relative to gold. Then you trade it back when the ratio swings the other way. The source claims that by doing this over and over, you can mathematically increase your total ounces without ever putting in a new dollar. So you might be thinking this is all incredibly complex. Why go to all this trouble? Why does this architecture need to exist in the first place? Well, according to the source material, it's a direct response to some massive and potentially explosive forces at play in the real-world physical metals market. The whole argument really starts with this idea of a tale of two markets. In the West, you have the paper market, think COMEX, which the source basically calls an artificial casino. It's a world of derivatives and contracts that it claims is hiding a huge physical shortage. Meanwhile, in the East, you have the physical market, where major players like central banks are demanding the actual physical metal be delivered, which is exposing what the source calls a decoupled reality. And it's not just investors driving this demand. The source makes a huge point about industrial and military needs that are completely insensitive to price. Take silver, for example. It's a critical component in things like hypersonic missiles and advanced electronics. This type of demand doesn't care what the spot price is. They need the physical commodity. And that, the argument goes, is creating a massive squeeze on the actual available supply. So what happens when you have this enormous, unstoppable physical demand slamming into a dwindling supply? A supply whose price is being set by a paper market. The source predicts something it calls the inevitable repricing event. Basically, a sudden and violent revaluation of the physical metal, as the paper game finally breaks and has to face the reality of an empty warehouse. And that really brings us to the core thesis of the whole document, boiled down to its simplest, most powerful conclusion. At the end of the day, it's a return to basics. He who has the commodities wins. So let's wrap this all up. The system laid out here is presenting a vision for a total paradigm shift. It's about moving away from an era of trusting institutions and their paper promises and into a new world. A world where wealth is defined by cryptographic proof, verified by a notary, and anchored in the hard, cold reality of physical stuff. Look, the architecture we've just walked through is complex, it's ambitious, and it's definitely based on a very particular view of the world. So the question it leaves us with is a really big one. Are we just looking at a clever, niche financial experiment here? Or is this the actual blueprint for a new financial reality? That's definitely something to think about.
They probably call security.
Right. Because you possess immense legal wealth, but you have zero actual liquidity.
Yeah, that's the core issue.
Our entire legal and, our financial infrastructure is built on this bizarre, excruciating delay between the reality of an obligation and the actual execution of that obligation.
That's a massive gap.
It is. It's a gap filled with friction, lawyers, banks, and just endless waiting. But the intelligence we are unpacking today for you claims that era is completely fundamentally over.
It is a profound structural inefficiency that we've simply accepted as the normal cost of civilization.
Yeah, just the way things are.
Right. We tolerate the gap between a promise and the fulfillment of that promise because, well, historically, we just haven't had the engineering to close it.
Until now, supposedly.
Exactly. The material we are dissecting today presents an operational blueprint that eliminates that gap entirely. I mean, it proposes a reality where the judgment and the liquid capital are the exact same thing, executing simultaneously.
And that is the mission for our deep dive today. We are unpacking a highly detailed post 2026 procedural handbook.
It's quite the document.
It really is. It is titled The Arizay CCG Affinite Sovereign Wealth Architecture.
A mouthful.
Oh, totally. But our goal is to map out what this document describes as a massive paradigm shift. I mean, we are looking at a world where legacy banking, traditional correspondent accounts, and years-long courtroom lawsuits are being entirely replaced.
Replaced by code.
Yes, replaced by an unholy alliance of mathematical code, tokenized commercial law, and believe it or not, physical elemental precious metals.
Which is exactly what makes this source material so uniquely compelling.
It's wild.
It really is. It's a synthesis of extreme antiquity and bleeding edge futurism. It tethers the most ancient form of wealth human beings have ever recognized.
Physical gold and silver.
Right, physical gold and silver. It tethers them to post 2026 cryptographic architecture, like 12-second smart contracts and immutable hashes.
And we need to emphasize right away for everyone listening, the sources present this not as some theoretical academic white paper, but as an active operational reality for high-value entities, sovereign wealth managers, and specialized notaries.
Yeah, this isn't science fiction. They are operating this way.
But before we jump into the actual mechanics of how this machine works, we have to lay down a brief but absolutely crucial disclaimer about the nature of this source material.
Yes, the context here is highly polarized.
Very.
The documents we're analyzing today contain extremely strong, very explicit critiques of Western financial institutions.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, the text literally refers to the traditional paper derivatives market in the West as an artificial casino.
It doesn't pull punches. Furthermore, it outlines some very specific, high-stakes geopolitical maneuvers currently being executed by Eastern nations, central banks, and governments.
Right, regarding the aggressive accumulation of physical assets and the total rejection of paper settlements.
Exactly.
And as your guides on this deep dive, we want to explicitly state that we take no sides here.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing these viewpoints, the political critiques, or the economic predictions contained in this text. We are not financial advisors, and we aren't geopolitical pundits.
We're just looking at the architecture.
Purely and simply, our job is to map out the architecture. We are here to explain the claims, the engineering, and the logic presented in this procedural handbook so you can understand the mechanics of the ecosystem they are building.
Right. We're dissecting the engine, looking at how the gears turn, regardless of who is driving the vehicle or what their destination might be.
Okay, let's unpack this because the scope of this document is just massive.
It covers a lot of ground.
It starts by declaring a specific point in time, February 2026, as a temporal datum, a point of no return.
A hard pivot.
Yeah. It claims we are transitioning out of a decaying paradigm into something entirely new. So where do we even begin to wrap our heads around an architecture this vast?
We begin with the concept of vulnerability, specifically the obsolescence of human trust.
Human trust as a vulnerability. That's a heavy concept.
It is. But if you think about the entirety of modern history, our financial and legal systems are inextricably tied to trusting people.
Right.
You trust the bank's brand to hold your deposit. You trust the bureaucrat's handshake.
You trust the judge's subjective interpretation of a contract when things go terribly wrong.
Exactly. And the source material argues that human trust is actually a critical point of failure. It's slow, it is highly corruptible, and it is inherently subjective.
So they want to remove the human element.
Yes.
Yes.
What we are looking at here is the engineering of a system where you no longer need to trust the human. You only need to trust the mathematics, the physics, and the immutable code.
Which brings us to the first major conceptual leap in the text, the shift from what they call human time adjudication to block time execution.
Let's break those terms down.
Yeah, when they say human time law, they are talking about the ex post system we live in right now. Ex post meaning after the fact.
Precisely. Think about any standard contract you sign today.
Like a lease or a loan.
Sure. If the other party fails to deliver, the enforcement only happens after the rule has been broken, and the process of enforcement is entirely reactive.
Yeah, you have to actually realize there was a breach first.
Right. Then you hire legal counsel, file a lawsuit, and subject yourself to months or years of discovery, court dates, and legal posturing.
It's an incredibly costly friction.
Very costly. And the outcome is always uncertain because it relies on a judge or a jury's subjective interpretation of the agreement.
And, I mean, that assumes the person who breached the contract even has the capital to pay the judgment by the time the court case is finally over. You might win the lawsuit after 3 years, only to find out the defendant is completely bankrupt.
Which renders the entire human time exercise practically worthless.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with block time execution. The RSA architecture operates on a 12-second finality.
12 seconds.
Yes. Transactions, settlements, and contract executions are verified, processed, and permanently recorded on a decentralized blockchain every 12 seconds.
So it's instantly binding.
Yes. This is an ex ante system. Ex ante meaning before the event. The enforcement is preventative. It happens at the exact mathematical moment of the transaction.
The text introduces a phrase for this that is incredibly evocative: syntactical trust and the grammar of finance.
I love that phrasing.
It's so good. It basically argues that a promise to pay is no longer just a hopeful declaration written in English on a piece of paper. It is a programmed executable function.
And that reconceptualizes the very nature of an obligation.
How so?
Well, in the legacy world, a contract is a set of instructions for humans to follow, and humans often fail. Right. But in this new world, a contract is executable code living within a deterministic digital system. If the conditions of that code are not met perfectly by all parties, it doesn't result in a breach of contract that you can sue over.
It results in a syntax error.
Yes, syntax error.
A syntax error, like when you're typing a complex formula into Excel and you miss a single parenthesis, and the program just gives you an error message and refuses to calculate it.
It doesn't guess what you meant.
Right. It doesn't say, oh, I think they meant to put a bracket here. It just stops.
And that hard stop is the enforcement mechanism.
Wow.
In the ERISA model, if a transaction lacks the necessary funds, or if the cryptographic signatures don't match perfectly, or if the timing is off by a millisecond according to the smart contract, it is a fatal flaw in the transaction's logic.
The system doesn't call a mediator to figure out what the parties intended.
Never. It autonomously reverts the transaction.
Okay, but to ensure the network doesn't get bogged down with all these failed transactions, the text details a specific filter that happens before a transaction even touches the main network.
Yes, the bouncer.
Right. It calls it the bouncer at the door for this CCG, the Complete Chain Guard protocols. This bouncer is something called the Loon algorithm, specifically modulus 10. What is this actually doing?
The Loon algorithm is a mathematical checksum formula.
Go.
It's not actually new. It's the exact same underlying logic that verifies if your credit card number is structurally valid before a payment terminal even attempts to communicate with your bank.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. In this sovereign architecture, it acts as a pre-screening grammar checker for the blockchain. Blockchains require immense computational energy to process data.
Right. Gas fees and all that.
Exactly. The CCG protocol uses this modulus 10 algorithm to ensure that it doesn't waste processing power attempting to validate gibberish, malformed code, or incomplete data packets.
So if the data packet doesn't make structural mathematical sense, the bouncer just turns it away at the door.
It hits an invisible wall.
Which is fascinating because it fundamentally redefines the role of the notary.
It elevates it entirely.
Yeah, because when I think of a notary right now, I think of going down to the local shipping store, paying $5, and having someone stamp a piece of paper.
They don't read the contract.
No, they don't care if it's a fair deal or if it's even legal. They are just a passive witness confirming that the person who signed it showed a matching driver's license.
The elevation of the civil law notary in this architecture is one of its most critical features.
How does it change?
In the legacy model, as you said, the notary is passive. But in the RSA model, The civil law notary is an active verifier of what the text calls animus, which translates to human intent.
Animus.
Yes. The notary is the crucial bridge between messy physical reality and the pristine digital blockchain.
So they are actually interrogating the deal.
Exactly. They aren't just verifying the structural form of a document. They are interrogating the substance, the legality, and the intent behind it. And then they are anchoring that verification cryptographically into the ledger.
I want to bring in an analogy from the text here because it perfectly crystallizes this idea of ex-ante legal engineering, the vending machine analogy.
It's a classic smart contract metaphor.
It is, but they apply it so well. If you walk up to a vending machine and sodas are exactly $2 and you put in $1.99 and press the button, well, nothing happens.
The machine is physically and logically incapable of dispensing the asset without the exact programmatic parameters being met.
And the absolute most important part of that reality is you cannot sue the vending machine.
No, you cannot.
You can't take the machine to arbitration and argue that you were really close, or that you promised to bring the penny tomorrow, or that you were desperately thirsty, so the machine should exercise leniency.
The enforcement is entirely inherent in the physical and logical design of the machine itself. That is the perfect distillation of syntactical trust. You cannot sue the network. A breach of contract becomes physically and mathematically impossible.
Because it just reverts.
Right. If the conditions aren't met, the transaction simply reverts as if it never occurred in the first place.
And there's no penalty.
The only penalty is the loss of a microscopic network gas fee for the computational attempt. This completely eradicates counterparty risk.
Because you don't have to trust the other guy.
You never have to trust that the other person will pay you because the code mathematically ensures that if you don't receive the payment, they do not receive the asset. It is an atomic exchange.
Okay, I see the sheer efficiency of that. But I have to push back on this. And if you're listening to this right now, think about the last time a strict rule worked against you when context really mattered.
Fair point.
If we completely remove human interpretation from the law, don't we lose mercy? Don't we lose nuance?
It's a common critique.
I mean, what happens if the code executes flawlessly? The math is perfect, but the real world outcome is objectively unfair due to an unforeseen catastrophe.
Like an act of God.
Yeah. A human judge can look at a situation and say, yes, by the strict letter of the contract, you are in default, but given this massive hurricane that destroyed your business, we are going to grant leniency.
Right.
A smart contract can't look at a hurricane.
That's
Doesn't this make the law incredibly cold, rigid, and potentially cruel?
What's fascinating here is that the architects of this system view the mercy or nuance you're describing as a euphemism for systemic vulnerability.
Oh, really?
Yes, they argue that judicial interpretation is simply a loophole where power, influence, and corruption can alter outcomes.
So they see human empathy as a bug, not a feature.
In a financial enforcement context, yes. The trade-off they are making is entirely deliberate. They have decided that eliminating counterparty eliminating the risk of a massive centralized exchange failing, or a bank freezing your assets, or an unallocated metal account turning out to be empty is far more valuable to a sovereign entity than the availability of subjective judicial leniency.
Wow.
In this ecosystem, predictable, incorruptible code is the ultimate referee. If you want a specific exception for a hurricane, you have to engineer that exception into the smart contract before you execute it.
So the burden of fairness is shifted entirely to the front end.
Completely.
You have to engineer the agreement perfectly before you press go, because once it's in the machine, it's absolute.
Yes. That is the essence of ex-ante engineering.
Okay, so the ledger is flawless, the code is uncorruptible. But we still haven't solved the core reality of being a human being living in the physical world.
The physical tether.
Right. A system of pure digital abstraction, just perfect math, moving tokens around a perfect ledger, risks becoming nothing more than a closed-loop video game. It has no intrinsic value.
It's just numbers.
Yeah. So how does this beautiful mathematical architecture actually tether itself to physical reality?
That structural friction is exactly what the second major section of the handbook addresses, the tripartite ecosystem.
The tripartite ecosystem.
Yes. The source argues adamantly that true financial sovereignty cannot exist as mere fiat numbers on a screen.
Which makes sense.
To prevent the digital assets from becoming meaningless abstraction, the system requires a convergence of three distinct pillars: the rules, the rails, and the rock.
Rules, rails, and rock. Okay, let's dig into these one by one because this is the actual anatomy of this new economy. Let's start with Pillar Way, the rules.
The legal layer.
The text says this is operated by something called AFINET and the Justice Fund Exchange. It talks about taking dead capital and bringing it to life. What exactly is dead capital?
Dead capital refers to claims that are legally valid but economically static.
Okay.
Remember your $1 million lawsuit analogy from the beginning?
Yeah, the paper judgment.
That court judgment is dead capital. Or consider a sworn affidavit of commerce, a legally binding promissory note, or an arbitration award.
Sure.
In the legacy system, these are pieces of paper sitting in a file cabinet. They represent theoretical value, but you can't easily buy equipment with them and you can't easily trade them. They are frozen and highly illiquid.
So AFINET is the system that operationalizes this legal layer.
Yes.
It takes that dead capital and tokenizes it. It converts these static paper claims into live, programmable digital assets called tokenized legal claims, or TLCs.
TLC is correct.
And the text emphasizes that it does this in a way that is compliant with UCC Article 9. Why is UCC Article 9 the magic key here?
Because UCC Article 9, the Uniform Commercial Code, is the absolute legal bedrock of secured transactions in commercial law.
In the US, at least.
Yes, and widely recognized internationally in various forms. It's the difference between an IOU written on a bar napkin and a legally perfected lien that a court of law must recognize.
Ah, I see.
By wrapping these digital tokens in UCC Article 9 compliance, they are wrapping them in the most ironclad legal armor available. They aren't just creating a cryptocurrency out of thin air, they are creating a digital representation of a legally perfected, enforceable, real-world right.
But how does the network know the piece of paper is real? I mean, if I have a piece of paper that says someone owes me $1 million, how does that become a trusted digital token? This goes back to our active verifier, the notary, doesn't it?
Exactly. This is where notarial engineering becomes the linchpin of the system.
Walk me through it.
The civil law notary takes that physical legal instrument, verifies its absolute authenticity, confirms the intent of the parties, and then creates what the architecture calls a triple hash anchor.
Okay, let's slow down and explain the triple hash.
Right.
Because hashing is fundamental to understanding how reality gets locked into the blockchain.
It is the core cryptographic tether.
A hash is essentially a unique digital fingerprint for a piece of data. If you change even one single comma in a 500-page document, the mathematical hash completely changes.
And it's a one-way cryptographic function.
Meaning?
You cannot reverse engineer the original document from the hash, but you can instantly and flawlessly prove that a specific document matches a specific hash.
Right.
So to anchor this legal claim, the notary creates 3 distinct digital fingerprints.
3 hashes.
First, the document hash. This is the mathematical proof of exactly what the text of the legal claim says.
So nobody can alter the terms.
Exactly. Second, the seal hash. This is cryptographic proof of exactly who the notary is that verified it, verifying their credentials and jurisdiction.
So we know the verifier was legit.
Yes. And third, the jurat hash. The cryptographic proof of the sworn statement or oath accompanying the document.
So the blockchain permanently locks down the what, the who, and the sworn truth of the matter.
Yes. And the output of this meticulous process is the tokenized legal claim. It's a digital security that represents that real world right.
But now, instead of being stuck in a file cabinet, that TLC can be used as collateral. It can be traded instantly, or it can be settled within the digital ecosystem.
That's the velocity of the system.
That covers pillar the rules. Now let's move to pillar the second, the rails. The text calls this the CCG's financial biodome.
The biodome.
Yeah. If AFINET is the legal right to the value, what are the rails?
The rails provide the velocity we just mentioned. They refer to the decentralized mesh network that actually facilitates the peer-to-peer transfer of these tokenized assets.
And the text explicitly notes that these rails completely bypass legacy clearinghouses like the DTCCA, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation.
Which is a monumental disruption of the legacy plumbing.
It's huge.
In the traditional financial world, if you buy a stock or transfer a significant asset, it doesn't just travel from my account to yours.
No, it goes through a middleman.
It routes through a massive centralized clearinghouse. That clearinghouse takes days to settle the trade. It assumes the counterparty risk. And most importantly, it acts as a centralized choke point that can halt trading or freeze assets at will.
Like we've seen happen with certain stocks recently.
Exactly. The CCG network enables instant cross-border settlement entirely without that middleman.
But wait, if they're completely bypassing traditional clearinghouses and legacy correspondent banking, How on earth are they handling compliance?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, because the primary criticism of decentralized networks is that they are havens for money laundering because there are no know your customer KYC protocols.
The architects anticipated that friction. They aren't ignoring compliance, they're automating it directly on-chain.
How does that work?
The text details the integration of specific token standards like ERC 3643.
ERC 3643.
Yes, this is a framework designed specifically for real-world assets that embeds KYC, anti-money laundering, and combating the financing of terrorism rules, AML and CFT, directly into the token's smart contract.
So the compliance is baked into the asset itself.
Exactly. If your digital identity on the network does not possess the proper cryptographically verified credentials, the token literally cannot be transferred into your wallet.
It just won't move.
The smart contract will reject the transfer. The compliance is syntactically enforced.
Wow.
That is why they refer to it as a financial biodome. It is a highly insulated, closed-loop economic zone where every single participant operating within it has been thoroughly and cryptographically vetted.
Okay, so we have the rules, the tokenized claims, we have the rails, the compliant instant mesh network, but we still just have digital tokens moving around a very sophisticated ledger.
Correct.
They're backed by legal claims,
Mhm.
what grounds the ultimate value of the entire system. That brings us to pillar the third, the rock. Physical precious metals, managed through an entity called Diversity Metals.
This is where the RSI architecture separates itself completely from standard, unbacked cryptocurrency models.
Because it's actually tied to something real.
The entire digital edifice derives its ultimate stability and credibility from its tether to physical reality, specifically physical gold and silver.
Now, the text uses a very deliberate phrase here. It insists that gold and silver are not to be treated as passive investments. They are active capital tools that provide kinetic energy to the system.
That terminology is crucial. In the legacy mindset, a person buys a gold bar, buries it in a safe, and waits for the fiat currency to collapse or for the dollar price of gold to go up.
Yeah, the doomsday prep mindset.
Exactly. It's a static defensive posture. It's dead weight. In this sovereign architecture, the physical metal is the ultimate foundational settlement layer. It collateralizes those tokenized legal claims.
I'm trying to visualize the physics of this. That's like tying a digital token to physical gold is like attaching a helium balloon to an anvil.
A helium balloon to an anvil.
Yeah, the digital token is the helium balloon. It's
Yeah.
weightless, it's frictionless, it can travel anywhere across the biodome instantly.
Right.
But the physical gold is the anvil. It's heavy, it's undeniably real, and it has intrinsic elemental value that has survived every empire for 5,000 years.
That is a highly illustrative metaphor. The balloon provides the necessary velocity for modern commerce, and the anvil provides the undeniable gravity that prevents the system from floating away into hyperinflation.
Okay, but my analogy actually highlights the exact vulnerability the system has to engineer around.
Which is,
How do you mathematically prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the balloon is actually physically tied to the anvil?
yes, the proof of reserves.
Right, because that is the exact rot at the center of the legacy system they're trying to escape. When an investor buys a gold ETF today or opens an unallocated gold account at a major global bank,
Yeah.
they do not actually own a specific physical bar of gold.
They own a paper promise.
Exactly. They own a paper promise that the bank has enough gold in a vault somewhere to cover all the promises they've made. And historically, we know for a fact that institutions lend out the exact same bar of gold multiple times.
Rehypothecate.
Right. It's a fractional reserve banking applied to elemental metals. So if this network is supposed to be trustless, how does a sovereign node know the physical gold actually exists in a vault and hasn't been rehypothecated 10 times over?
The solution is the synthesis of the notary chain and what they term the physical asset hash.
Let's break that down.
When a sovereign node acquires a physical unit of gold or silver in this system, it isn't just tossed into a dark pile in a depository.
It's individualized.
Yes. The entire chain of custody, the metallurgical assay proving its exact purity, and its unique physical serialization are all subjected to active verification by a civil law notary.
The active verifier steps in again.
Yes. The notary takes all of that immutable physical data and hashes it, creating the physical asset hash.
So it creates a digital twin.
Exactly. This creates a one-to-one, mathematically tamper-proof digital twin of that specific serialized piece of metal on the ledger.
So I can look at my phone and see my exact bar of gold.
If you hold the digital token in your wallet, you possess cryptographic proof of your soul, unencumbered ownership of a specific physical asset. It bridges the physical reality to the blockchain so tightly that attempting to lend that asset out twice would require breaking the fundamental cryptography of the entire network.
Okay, I am tracking the logic. We have an anvil of real notarized wealth. We've tokenized it so we can move it at the speed of light. But I have to ask a very practical, boots on the ground question.
Go for it.
The anvil is too heavy to buy bread.
Yes, it is.
Let's say I am a fully integrated sovereign node. I have a 400-ounce gold bar sitting in a secure vault, perfectly tokenized. I go to the grocery store to buy food for my family. The grocery bill is $200.
Okay.
I cannot buy groceries with an indivisible 400-ounce gold bar.
They want to change for that.
No. And I can't even really buy it with a standard 1-ounce gold coin, which is currently worth thousands of fiat dollars. So how does this system solve the physical liquidity problem? How do you actually use this wealth as money without constantly having to sell it back into the fiat casino they are trying to escape?
And this transitions us to the core utility described in Section 3 of the handbook, active capital and financial teleportation.
Financial teleportation.
Yes. The source material explicitly identifies the exact friction point you just raised. They call it the indivisibility and liquidity friction problem, or more colloquially, the grocery store problem.
The grocery store problem. It's the Achilles heel of every gold advocate. You might be a millionaire in bullion, but if you can't buy a cup of coffee, it's not a functional currency.
Precisely. And solving it requires a fundamental psychological shift.
What kind of shift?
The handbook states that a post-2026 sovereign entity must transition from being a passive collector to an active capitalist.
Okay, let's define those.
The collector measures their wealth in fiat dollars and stores metal merely as an insurance policy against disaster.
Right, checking the dollar price of gold every day.
Exactly. The capitalist, however, measures their wealth purely in physical weight ounces and deploys that metal for yield, leverage, and daily liquidity.
But how?
And they achieve this through what the text calls the spendable instrument revolution.
And this is where the actual physical form of the metal undergoes a technological evolution.
Yeah.
We aren't just talking about heavy cast bars or chunky coins anymore.
No, the form factor changes entirely.
The text details the use of advanced vacuum deposition technology to create highly fractional spendable instruments. They specifically highlight polymer notes like goldbacks and silverbacks. What are these?
Imagine a piece of currency similar in size and flexibility to a standard fiat dollar bill.
Okay, like a normal paper bill.
But instead of being made of paper and ink backed by government decree, it is made of a highly durable polymer that contains a precisely measured layer of actual 24-karat gold or pure silver atoms vacuum deposited directly inside it.
So the money isn't a receipt for the metal.
No.
The money is the metal.
Exactly. And the technological breakthrough here is the extreme divisibility. You can engineer a note that contains exactly 11,000th of an ounce of gold.
That's tiny.
It completely neutralizes the indivisibility problem. You now possess physical precious metal that functions identically to a highly divisible peer-to-peer currency.
So I can just hand it over.
You can hand a merchant exactly $2 worth of physical gold just as seamlessly as handing them a
power of my own wealth.
It's a massive friction point.
But the text claims these spendable instruments avoid that entirely.
They avoid it because of how they are integrated into the digital architecture through a sequence, the authors term financial teleportation.
Using the atomic settlement protocol.
Yes. This is perhaps the most complex yet most powerful mechanical sequence described in the entire handbook.
Let's get into it.
It is the engineered ability to spend the purchasing power of your physical asset without ever similar in size and flexibility to a standard fiat dollar bill.
Okay, like a normal paper bill.
But instead of being made of paper and ink backed by government decree, it is made of a highly durable polymer that contains a precisely measured layer of actual 24-karat gold or pure silver atoms vacuum deposited directly inside it.
So the money isn't a receipt for the metal.
No.
The money is the metal.
Exactly. And the technological breakthrough here is the extreme divisibility. You can engineer a note that contains exactly 11 thousandth of an ounce of gold.
That's tiny.
It completely neutralizes the indivisibility problem. You now possess physical precious metal that functions identically to a highly divisible peer-to-peer currency.
So I can just hand it over.
You can hand a merchant exactly $2 worth of physical gold just as seamlessly as handing them a paper $5 bill.
And the text provides a comparative analysis chart that highlights a massive structural advantage to this form factor regarding taxation.
The tax implications are huge.
If I have a traditional 1 ounce gold coin and I want to buy groceries, I have to sell the coin to a dealer for fiat currency first.
Right.
In almost every global jurisdiction, selling that physical asset triggers a taxable capital gains event.
Yeah.
I am financially punished by the state for accessing the purchasing power of my own wealth.
It's a massive friction point.
But the text claims these spendable instruments avoid that entirely.
They avoid it because of how they are integrated into the digital architecture through a sequence, the authors term financial teleportation.
Using the atomic settlement protocol.
Yes. This is perhaps the most complex yet most powerful mechanical sequence described in the entire handbook.
Let's get into it.
It is the engineered ability to spend the purchasing power of your physical asset without ever actually selling the asset itself.
Financial teleportation. Okay, we need to walk through this step by step, millisecond by millisecond, because this sounds like the holy grail for wealth management.
It really does.
I am standing at the checkout counter at the grocery store. I have my tokenized spendable instruments, the digital twins of my physical polymer notes, in my RSI digital wallet.
Okay, you're at the register.
The cashier rings up my food. What exactly happens under the hood when I initiate that payment?
We can break the teleportation down into 4 distinct programmatic steps.
Step 1.
Step 1 is intent and verification. You present your payment method, likely via a secure card, NFC, or an app linked to your RSI identity.
Tap to pay.
Right. The system instantly queries the notary chain. It checks the digital soul, the unique hash of your spendable instruments, to confirm 2 critical parameters: that the instruments are authentic and that you possess clear, unencumbered title to them.
Right, because if I have a secret lien on that metal, I don't really own it.
Exactly.
So once the system proves I own it free and clear, it has to freeze it, right? Otherwise, I could just run to another store across town and spend the exact same gold again before the blockchain updates.
Exactly. That brings us to step 2, the collateralization lock.
The lock.
The smart contract programmatically freezes the digital twins of your physical instruments. You still legally own them, but you are cryptographically prohibited from moving them or spending them anywhere else.
So they are frozen in my wallet.
They have transitioned from idle wealth into active collateral. This step acts as the bridge between the legacy plastic payment terminal at the grocery store and the blockchain smart contract.
Got it. My gold is locked as collateral. Now, step 3, the text refers to this as the kinetic energy phase, the atomic flash loan.
This is where the magic of the 12-second block time execution is realized.
What happens in those 12 seconds?
Within a single indivisible block on the blockchain, a multi-step sequence occurs instantaneously. The smart contract borrows the necessary fiat currency, let's say it's euros or dollars, from a decentralized liquidity pool within the network.
Okay, so it borrows fiat.
It instantly transmits that fiat to the merchant to settle your grocery bill in the local currency they require.
So the merchant gets their normal fiat.
And simultaneously, it creates a debt obligation against your locked metal collateral.
Wait, let me make sure I am grasping the magnitude of this.
It's a lot to process.
The system borrows the fiat, pays the store in the fiat they want, and gives me a loan against my own gold, all within a 12-second window.
Yes. You have successfully utilized the purchasing power of your asset to acquire goods, but you did not sell your asset. Because no sale occurred, you did not trigger a taxable capital gains event. And because it's a loan secured by mathematically over-collateralized physical assets you already hold, there is no credit check, no underwriting, and no traditional loan approval process.
It's like having your cake, eating it too, and forcing the bakery to pay the tax.
That's a great way to put it.
You keep your gold, but you get your groceries.
Yeah.
But what if something breaks?
What do you mean?
What if the internet connection drops? Or the global price of gold plummets dramatically during those exact 12 seconds? Or the liquidity pool simply doesn't have enough fiat to cover the merchant?
That is addressed by step 4, atomic reversion safety.
Atomic reversion.
This operation is atomic in the strict computer science definition. It either executes 100% completely or it does not execute at all.
All or nothing.
Exactly. If any single condition fails during those 12 seconds, if liquidity dries up or price slips beyond a set tolerance, the entire transaction reverts. It rolls back perfectly as if it never occurred.
The syntax error we talked about earlier.
Precisely. The merchant doesn't get a half payment. Your collateral doesn't get stuck in digital limbo waiting for a refund. It just reverts.
And what's the cost of that failure?
You pay a microscopic network gas fee for the computational attempt, and your physical metal collateral remains perfectly protected and unlocks. It is never at risk of liquidation outside that specific atomic 12-second execution window.
Okay, that is an incredibly elegant piece of engineering. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. And I want to look at this from the perspective of the sovereign node actually living this lifestyle.
Okay, let's play this out.
I'm doing this financial teleportation every day. I'm locking my gold. I'm borrowing fiat to buy my groceries, to pay my electric bill, to fund my business operation.
You're living off flash loans.
Right. Aren't I just accumulating massive compounding amounts of fiat debt? I have a growing loan against my gold. If I never sell the gold to pay it off, how do I clear the ledger?
That's the catch, isn't it?
Yeah. How does a sovereign node actually grow their wealth in this system without being forced to inject more and more outside fiat money to pay down these flash loans?
That is the pivotal operational question. If you are just endlessly borrowing against a static, unchanging pile of assets, you'll inevitably be liquidated by the math.
So what's the solution?
To understand how a sovereign node grows wealth without introducing new fiat, we have to examine Section 4 of the handbook, Strategic Sovereign Operations.
Strategic operations.
This section details how these nodes manipulate mathematical ratios and internal closed-loop ecosystems to their advantage.
The text calls it the metal arbitrage blueprint, and the first strategy it outlines is mathematical accumulation, or ratio arbitrage.
Yes.
The text explicitly states the value-centric investor ignores fiat prices, which completely contradicts everything standard financial literacy teaches us. We are taught to measure our success by buying low and selling high in dollars. But this system says to ignore the dollar entirely.
Because fiat currency is an elastic, highly manipulated yardstick.
A rubber ruler.
Exactly. If you measure your wealth in dollars, your perception of value is constantly distorted by inflation and central bank policy. The active capitalist in this system measures wealth purely in physical weight total ounces of metal.
Just counting ounces.
And they grow those ounces by playing the gold to silver ratio, commonly known as the GSR.
Let's walk through the mechanics of this gold to silver ratio play, because the handbook provides a very specific numerical example that is frankly staggering if it executes the way they claim.
The gold to silver ratio is simply a metric of how many ounces of silver it takes to purchase 1 ounce of gold at any given time.
Right.
Historically, this ratio fluctuates wildly based on industrial demand, monetary policy, and market sentiment. The sovereign strategy is to relentlessly exploit that mathematical variance.
Let's use the text example.
The handbook provides this exact scenario. Let's assume you start with 100 ounces of physical gold. You ignore the dollar price entirely. You simply monitor the market until the ratio hits a historic high. The text uses a ratio of 100 to 1 as the trigger example.
Okay, so when the ratio is 100 to 1 ounce of gold buys exactly 100 ounces of silver.
Right, so gold is exceptionally strong compared to silver at that moment.
Got it.
At that precise moment, you execute what they call a high ratio swap. You exchange your 100 ounces of gold for 10,000 ounces of silver.
Okay, so my vault now holds 0 gold, but a mountain of 10,000 ounces of silver.
Yes, and then you wait. This is the strategic holding phase.
Wait for what?
You wait for the market to tighten, for silver demand to outpace gold, and for the ratio to contract. The historical average for the ratio over centuries is much lower, closer to 15 to 1, but the text uses a very conservative target of 40 to 1 for its example.
Okay, 40 to 1.
When the ratio compresses to 40 to 1, meaning it now only takes 40 ounces of silver to buy an ounce of gold, you execute the reversion swap.
So I take my pile of 10,000 ounces of silver and I divide it by the new ratio of 40.
Correct. You exchange the silver back for gold. 10,000 divided by 40 equals 250.
I end up with 250 ounces of gold.
Yes. You began with 100 ounces of gold. You executed 2 trades based purely on a mathematical ratio, entirely ignoring the fiat price of either metal. You concluded the operation with 250 ounces of gold.
That's a huge gain.
You increased your physical holdings by 150%, and you did it with 0 new fiat currency added to your portfolio. You used the money, the physical metal itself, to mathematically generate more money.
That is mathematically beautiful on paper. But there is a massive real-world friction point here.
Which is?
If I go down to the local retail coin shop to try and execute that 100-to-1 swap, the dealer is going to take a massive premium cut on both sides of the transaction. The text talks about bypassing the retail premium rig. What is that?
The retail premium rig is the structural inefficiency designed into the legacy precious metals market to extract wealth from retail buyers.
Like markups.
Exactly. When an average person purchases a silver coin, they aren't paying the global spot price. They are buying from an authorized purchaser who bought it from a national mint, who bought it from a refiner. By the time that coin reaches the retail buyer, the markups can exceed 100% over the actual melt value of the metal.
So a piece of silver with a raw melt value of $30 might cost you $60 to actually hold in your hand.
Yes.
Which completely destroys the math of that ratio trade we just talked about.
Yeah.
The dealer premiums would eat all your mathematical profits.
Precisely. Which is why the Eraze Affinet network operates on a completely different stratum.
Through diversity metals.
Yes, through its institutional and direct acquisition channels. The sovereign nodes within the network bypass that entire retail extraction layer. They access physical metal at or near wholesale institutional spot prices.
That's a huge advantage.
It is. This frictionless wholesale access to the raw asset is the prerequisite that makes the mathematical accumulation strategy viable.
Okay, so that explains how they mathematically grow the physical pile of metal to offset the debt. But there is another concept in this section that is honestly mind-bending. It's the closed-loop economy and policy value arbitrage.
This is a complex one.
It seems to be the ultimate mechanism for settling those internal flash loans we talked about earlier. The text defines 3 distinct tiers of value using a specific case study. The Hades silverback. Let's walk through these tiers, because this is where the system divorces itself from standard economics.
The Hades silverback is a specific, highly scarce type of spendable polymer note. The text breaks down its value into 3 distinct tiers to illustrate how the internal biodome economy functions independently of the outside world.
Okay, let's start with Tier 1.
Tier 1 is the acquisition cost. This is the wholesale cost for a sovereign node to acquire the physical asset. In the case study, it's roughly 142 fiat dollars.
Okay, Tier 1 is $142. That is the baseline raw cost. What is Tier 2?
Tier 2 is the collector's value, or the external retail market value. Because these specific notes are beautiful, mathematically scarce, and possess high numismatic appeal, they trade on secondary open markets like auction sites for vastly more than their raw metal content.
So what's the number?
The text lists the Tier 2 value at approximately $2,500.
So someone acquired it for $142 wholesale, and a collector out in the normal fiat world is willing to pay $2,500 for it just to own it.
Right.
That's a phenomenal return.
It is.
But Tier 3 is where the math just goes completely off the charts.
Yeah.
What is the policy value?
Tier 3 is the internal policy value. The text states that within the CCG biodome, the policy value of this exact same instrument can be leveraged up to $36,000.
Wait, really?
Yes, $36,000.
$36,000 for a piece of polymer and silver that cost $142 to manufacture. How is that remotely possible? I could play devil's advocate here.
Good.
If a network of people just gets together and arbitrarily agrees that something is worth 250 times its actual cost, isn't that just a new flavor of the artificial casino they claim they are escaping? How is that not a giant Ponzi bubble waiting to collapse?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes logical sense, but only within the strictly defined architecture of syntactical trust.
Okay, explain that.
We have to understand why human psychology within this network allows this markup to exist. Think of policy value like a casino chip, but in a casino where every single participant cryptographically trusts the math and the physical backing.
The casino chip.
Yes. When you are inside a high-end casino, a plastic chip represents $10,000. Outside the casino, it's just a worthless piece of plastic. But because everyone inside the system honors its utility for settling debts and playing the game, it holds that $10,000 value perfectly.
Okay, so it only works as long as I'm using it inside the closed-loop biodome. But why would another node accept it at that inflated value?
Because they value the internal liquidity and the insulation from the fiat tax net more than they value cashing out into external fiat.
Oh, I see.
The text explicitly states this value is used to settle internal debts, arbitrate claims, and extend credit entirely insulated from external fiat inflation.
Give me an example.
If you and I are both sovereign nodes, and I owe you a debt because of a flash loan, We can agree via smart contract to settle that debt using the internal policy value of the asset. The asset never leaves the network. It's an internal accounting mechanism.
So we just agree on the internal value.
If Node A and Node B both agree that utilizing this internal leverage is vastly superior to converting assets to taxable fiat, the consensus holds. It doesn't collapse because they aren't trying to run to a traditional bank and demand $36,000 in cash. They are using it purely as internal kinetic energy to power their operations within the high trust biodome.
So if I took out a flash loan to buy groceries and I accumulated some fiat debt inside the system, I could settle that internal debt using the massively multiplied policy value of my physical assets without ever having to drain my actual physical ounce count.
That is the ultimate capitalist edge described in the text. It is the maximization of leverage without the risk of external liquidation.
Wow. Okay. That is a radically different way of conceptualizing money, debt, and value. But it relies entirely on this internal ecosystem remaining intact.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the final major section of the handbook, the physical imperative and geopolitical drivers. Because this internal biodome sounds highly theoretical. It sounds like a lot of complex math built by idealists.
It does.
Why are major global players, sovereign wealth funds, and actual governments rushing to adopt physical anchoring right now? The text argues that the math of RSI isn't happening in a vacuum. It is a desperate technological response to the physical hoarding of commodities by nation states.
The authors argue forcefully that the architecture we've been discussing is being forced into existence by acute, undeniable physical realities in the global market.
What kind of realities?
They describe a paradigm-shifting tale of two markets, the paper market in the West and the physical market in the East.
Let's contrast those because the statistics the text provides are startling. The paper market, which is represented by legacy exchanges like the COMEX in New York or the LBMA in London, the text describes this as a system running entirely on naked shorts and administrative margin hikes.
Yes.
Explain the mechanics of a margin hike, because it shows how rigged the fiat casino really is.
A paper market trades derivatives contracts promising to deliver metal at a future date, but they trade exponentially more paper contracts than there is actual physical metal in the vaults to back them up.
That's a naked short.
Correct. When the price of the metal starts to rise too quickly, threatening to expose the fact that there isn't enough metal, the exchanges use administrative tactics to suppress the price. For example, they will institute a sudden, massive margin hike.
The text gives a historical example of hiking the margin requirement from $21,000 to $45,000 overnight. Put us in the shoes of a trader when that happens.
If you are a retail speculator holding a paper contract on leverage, you are required to keep a certain amount of cash margin in your account to back that trade.
Right, collateral.
If the exchange suddenly changes the rules overnight and demands you deposit another $24,000 in cash by tomorrow morning just to keep your position open, you likely cannot do it.
So you get liquidated.
You are forcibly liquidated. You are forced to sell your contract. This massive orchestrated wave of forced selling drives the paper price of the metal back down.
Wow.
It's a purely artificial mechanism to manage the paper price and mask the severe physical shortages in the actual vaults.
And the text contrasts that deeply with the Eastern markets, specifically mentioning the SGE, the Shanghai Gold Exchange. How do they operate differently?
The actors in the East Central banks, sovereign wealth funds, institutional accumulators, they aren't playing a game of leverage and paper contracts. They demand full payment up front, and they stand for physical delivery.
They want the actual metal.
They do not want a paper promise. They want the actual elemental bar of metal put onto a cargo plane and flown to their sovereign vault. The text notes that at one point, physical demand on the SGE hit up to 1,538 tons in a single month.
Which creates what the text calls the Shanghai premium.
Yes. Because the East is demanding real physical metal and the West is playing a game of paper musical chairs, the prices have decoupled.
By how much?
The Eastern markets are currently pricing physical silver, for example, roughly $30 higher than the Western paper spot price. The illusion of the paper market is breaking because you fundamentally cannot satisfy a physical industrial demand with a paper derivative.
And it's not just central banks buying gold to look pretty in their vaults. The text goes into a fascinating detail about the military-industrial squeeze.
This is crucial.
It specifically highlights the irreplaceable role of silver in modern warfare. This isn't just about money, it's about weapons.
This is perhaps the most critical driver of the new epoch. Silver is the most thermally and electrically conductive element on Earth. It is physically irreplaceable in advanced electronics, photovoltaics, and crucially, in the thermal management systems and guidance systems of next generation weaponry.
Like hypersonic missiles.
Exactly. Hypersonic
Let's picture that. Hypersonic missiles. Missiles traveling at Mach 5, 5 times the speed of sound. The atmospheric friction at that speed generates immense melting heat.
massive heat that would destroy normal electronics. And silver is required for the heat shields and the delicate internal guidance systems that allow those weapons to function at those velocities.
The military needs it desperately.
When a sovereign nation is building its next generation military infrastructure, their demand for silver becomes entirely price insensitive. The military procurement officer does not care if silver is $20 an ounce or $200 an ounce. They must possess the physical element to build the missile.
It's like the paper markets in the West are playing a massive game of musical chairs with paper receipts, but the military just walked into the room and stole the actual physical chairs to build fighter jets.
That is a very accurate, visceral way to visualize the crisis. And this realization has led to a massive strategic shift at the highest levels of government. The text points out that the U.S. government has recently moved to reclassify silver as a critical mineral.
Which sounds like a boring bureaucratic designation, but the handbook implies it is the catalyst for everything we've discussed today.
It changes the entire global landscape. It shifts the state's policy from trying to suppress the price of silver to urgently securing state-sponsored physical stockpiles. It means the government recognizes that a shortage of physical silver is no longer a market anomaly. It is a direct existential threat to national security.
The text ties this all together by saying this physical hoarding is causing the breaking of Gibson's paradox. Let's unpack the history of that, because it explains why governments hate gold.
Gibson's paradox is an economic observation that historically there is a correlation between interest rates and the general price level. In modern application, the theory suggests that governments must aggressively suppress the price of precious metals to maintain the psychological illusion that their unbacked fiat currency and government bonds are strong.
So if gold goes up, the dollar looks weak.
Exactly. If gold and silver skyrocket, it is a glaring red alarm that the fiat currency is failing. But the text argues that Gibson's paradox is finally breaking under the weight of physical reality.
Because of the industrial demand?
Suppressing the paper price simply doesn't matter anymore because sovereign buyers and militaries are draining the actual physical inventory. As the text concludes regarding the new epoch, he who has the commodities wins.
Okay, but this raises a massive flashing alarm bell for me.
What's that?
If I am listening to this and I understand the geopolitics and I decide to become a sovereign node, I acquire physical silver, I tokenize it via Affinet, I put it in a highly secure vault, and then the government, precisely because of this new critical mineral status, decides it absolutely needs that silver for national security.
Yeah.
Doesn't this entire biodome idea fall apart?
Seizure.
Yeah. How does a sovereign nerd protect against outright state seizure? We've seen it happen before. In the 1930s, Executive Order 6102 literally criminalized the possession of gold, and the U.S. government confiscated it.
This raises an important question, and it goes right to the heart of why the complex Affinet and notary architecture was built in the first place.
To stop confiscation.
The architects of RSI know the state is coming for the metal. In the legacy system, if you hold your wealth in a centralized ETF or a massive public depository, it is a single point of failure. With one stroke of a pen, a government agency can freeze that asset or send agents to seize it. However, within the RSI architecture, the defense is not just hiding the metal. The defense is cryptographic decentralization and weaponized notarial engineering.
Weaponized notarial engineering. How does complex cryptography stop a government agent with a physical warrant from walking into a vault?
It introduces profound legal, jurisdictional, and practical complexity. Remember Pillar of the Four?
The legal claims.
Yes. The physical asset isn't just sitting there as raw metal. It is fundamentally tethered to a tokenized legal claim, a TLC governed by UCC Article 9.
Okay.
It is a legally perfected security interest, registered on a decentralized blockchain, actively verified by a civil law notary. Seizing the physical asset without possessing the cryptographic key to the digital twin creates a massively fractured legal title.
Because the blockchain says I still own it.
Furthermore, the assets are often fractionalized, like the polymer notes we discussed, and distributed across a decentralized mesh network of nodes, not sitting in one giant, easily targetable pile.
So it's scattered everywhere.
The architecture is explicitly designed to make seizure so legally convoluted, jurisdictionally tangled, and practically difficult that it becomes unfeasible compared to the old methods of simply rating a centralized bank's ledger.
So it's weaponized compliance. They're using the state's own deepest legal frameworks, like the Uniform Commercial Code, and combining them with mathematical immutability to build a legal fortress around the physical asset.
Exactly. They are using the grammar of the state's own laws to create a zone of true, unassailable financial sovereignty.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. The handbook concludes with a summary of the sovereign node implementation pathway, which is basically the step-by-step guide to entering this post-2026 epoch. Let's briefly recap those 4 steps.
The first step is education. The text emphasizes that one must master the concepts of syntactical trust, UCC commercial law, and notarial procedure. You simply cannot operate in this environment without understanding the grammar of the finance.
Right, you have to know the rules.
The second step is acquisition, securing the rock. This involves acquiring physical precious metals in spendable fractional forms at strategic wholesale price points.
Right, bypassing that retail premium break we talked about.
Yes. The third step is integration, onboarding as a sovereign node within the ERISA CCG AFINET network. The text mentions there are minimum physical reserve thresholds to participate in the high trust biodome, such as 10 ounces of gold and 100 ounces of silver.
And the final step.
And finally, activation. This is where the theory becomes kinetic. Verifying instruments through the notary, executing the ratio arbitrage we discussed, utilizing internal policy value for leverage, and facilitating daily financial teleportation.
The complete blueprint for the post-2026 financial epoch. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We've spent the last hour looking at how this system completely shifts the enforcement of human agreements from the state's physical courtrooms to immutable mathematical code. We've seen how it shifts the storage of value from state-issued fiat currency to decentralized physical commodities. If this transition actually plays out the way this handbook describes, well, what happens to the very concept of the nation-state?
That is the ultimate unspoken geopolitical question hidden within this architecture.
If individuals, corporations, and sovereign entities can teleport financial value atomically across borders in 12 seconds, and if they can settle their debts internally using policy value without ever touching the legacy banking system, does the nation-state lose its ultimate power?
It's a staggering thought.
If a government can no longer monitor, tax, and control the economic lifeblood of its citizens because that lifeblood is encrypted and tokenized, what power does the state actually have left?
It suggests a future where sovereignty is no longer determined by lines on a map and standing armies, but by cryptographic proof, notarial intent, and the physical possession of elemental mass.
It seems the blurry, muddy waters of our financial reality are finally clearing up. But what is being revealed isn't just a repaired version of the old system. It's an entirely new skeleton, built of math, code, and precious metal. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll leave you to process the paradigm shift.
The Ultimate Precious Metals IRA Handbook, Strategic Wealth Positioning in the Era of Syntactical Trust. 1. The Great Monetary Re-Architecture, from Institutional Assumption to Cryptographic Proof. As of February 2026, the global economic paradigm has shifted from human time to block time. We have exited the era of institutional assumption, where wealth preservation relied on the perceived solvency of brands and the handshakes of bureaucrats, and entered the era of cryptographic proof. This is a transition from trusting people to trusting mathematics. In this new landscape, the sovereign node replaces the passive depositor, anchoring financial agency in immutable code. The syntactical trust architecture. At the core of this re-architecture is syntactical trust. This framework treats financial and legal obligations not as negotiable promises, but as the grammar of finance. In this system, a contract breach is not a matter for a courtroom, it is a syntax error that prevents execution entirely. To protect the network from gibberish and human error, the system utilizes the LUN algorithm, modulus 10a mathematical bouncer that acts as a first-line grammar checker, ensuring the blockchain only processes structurally valid, standard network data. Feature legacy model, ex post, syntactical model, ex ante enforcement reactive, litigation after the breach, preventive, engineering prohibits the breach trust basis institutional brand, reputation code, mathematics, and physics. SPI human time, weeks/months, block time, 12-second finality failure mode breach of contract, requires lawsuit, syntax error, Transaction reverts. The vending machine efficiency. The so what of this shift is the move to ex-ante legal engineering. In the legacy system, if someone owes you money, you sue them and wait years. In the syntactical model, the system acts as a robot referee. Much like a vending machine that physically cannot dispense a product until the exact payment syntax is met, this architecture removes the need for expensive litigation. You cannot sue the machine. The failure to execute is the enforcement.
I wanted spending money that didn't lose value the second That's why I started using Goldbacks. They're real 24-karat gold you can spend just like cash, but with one huge difference. They don't get crushed by inflation. Thousands of stores accept them, so I can actually use them for everyday things. And while my dollars weaken sitting in my wallet, my Goldbacks hold their strength. Plus, when you pay with them, nothing gets tracked. It just feels like cash finally upgraded into something that protects you.